Imagine you are a professional defender. You have spent your entire life mastering the art of positioning, the subtle pull of a jersey, the perfectly timed tackle, and the mental game of forcing a striker into a low-percentage area. You are playing for the biggest club in the world. You are at the top of your game, seasoned by years of facing the absolute best talent the sport has to offer. And then you see him, standing in the tunnel. He doesn't look like your typical striker. He is 6'4" of pure, calculated velocity, with a stare that seems to suggest he's already mapped out your mistakes before the first whistle has even blown. This is Erling Haaland, and for the elite defenders of our time, the fear isn't just about his goal tally or his terrifying consistency. It is about the fact that he breaks the rules of physics. He doesn't just play football, he dissects it with a cold, detached precision that feels less like sport and more like a systematic dismantling of your professional integrity. When you look at the archives of the greatest strikers to ever grace the pitch, you see artistry, flair, or maybe sheer raw aggression. But with Haaland, the scouting reports don't describe a footballer. They describe a biomechanical anomaly designed in a lab to render your entire career obsolete. In the first few minutes of a match, while you are still settling into your defensive line, adjusting your boots, and reading the game, he is already reading you. He doesn't need 10 touches to beat you. He doesn't need to dribble past you with the step-overs of a Brazilian icon or the intricate link-up play of a classic number 10. He just needs a gap the size of a postage stamp and a fraction of a second where your concentration falters. That is all. The fear in the eyes of a center back when they realize they have to sprint with him isn't an exaggeration, is a logical, primal response to a threat that moves faster than the human brain can process. Why are the best defenders in the world, players who have stopped the greatest names in the sport, completely rattled by a young man who often seems to be playing a completely different game? The answer lies in numbers that, quite frankly, don't make sense. We are talking about a player who has turned the penalty box into a place of total anxiety. But behind this terrifying dominance, there's a technical evolution that most tactical analysts miss. It isn't just power, it's a form of human artificial intelligence, a striker who has optimized the sport of football down to its very atomic level. Yet every legend has a story that the highlights never show. We see the goals, the celebrations, and the record-breaking numbers, but we rarely see the human cost, the way his arrival forced an entire tactical revolution across Europe. The defenders of the past had a manual on how to stop a striker. That manual has been burned. The fear is real. But to truly understand it, we need to look at how he dismantles the most organized systems in football, not with flair, but with pure, unrelenting math. But before we understand how he systematically dismantled the most organized systems, we have to look at the beginning. How does a lanky, quiet kid from Norway transform himself into the nightmare of every European defense? The path to his ascent was not linear, and the early years were filled with doubts that few people remember today. We are about to look at the files that trace his rise from the freezing pitches of Scandinavia to the bright, unforgiving lights of the Premier League. The story of Haaland is not just about the goals, it's about the transformation. This is a story about how the game evolved to be faster, stronger, and more lethal, and how one player became the ultimate benchmark of that change. Stick with us, because the anatomy of his rise is going to change how you watch every single game from now on. To understand why defenders are terrified, you have to look at the genesis of the machine. The transition from a promising, lanky teenager in Norway to the devastating force we see in Manchester today was not just about growing into his frame. It was about the obsessive optimization of human movement. Before he reached the pinnacle of European football, Haaland was already displaying a level of spatial awareness that was, quite frankly, abnormal for his age. Most strikers of his height, towering over defenders, are told to play with their back to the goal, to act as a target man, to be the classic pivot. But Haaland ignored that script. He didn't want to hold the ball up. He wanted to destroy the space behind the defensive line. When you watch his early footage from Molde and Salzburg, you aren't seeing a traditional forward. You are seeing a tactical disruptor who viewed the offside line as a suggestion rather than a rule. The numbers from his early development were not just good, they were alarm bells. By the time he hit the Champions League stage with Red Bull Salzburg, he wasn't just scoring, he was doing it with an efficiency that made seasoned professionals look like amateurs. He required fewer touches to score than almost anyone in the history of the competition. For a defender, that is the most terrifying statistic possible. It means you don't have time to recover. If you make a mistake, if you take a half step in the wrong direction, if you blink for a millisecond, the ball is already in the net before your brain has even registered the threat. He had mastered the art of the blindside run, a technique where he waits until the defender shifts their focus to the ball, and then, in the blink of an eye, he explodes into the vacated space. It is a psychological game as much as it is a physical one. This leads us to the fundamental reason for the fear, the inevitability. When you face a technical dribbler, you can hope for a tackle. When you face a classic target man, you can use your physicality to push him out of the box. But how do you defend against someone who is faster than you in a sprint, stronger than you in a duel, and smarter than you in reading the flow of the play? You can't. That is the reality that modern defenders are facing every single weekend. They are entering the pitch knowing that, regardless of how well they prepare, they are essentially playing a game of catch-up against a clock that never slows down. His acceleration, his top speed, and his capacity to maintain that intensity for 90 minutes have rendered the traditional defensive block obsolete. Systems that were designed to stop strikers of the 2010s simply cannot account for the sheer physical output of a player who seems to move at a different frame rate than the rest of the world. But there is a specific, cold reason why his efficiency remains so high even when the pressure is at its absolute limit. It isn't luck, and it isn't just natural talent. It's a relentless, almost clinical focus on the most dangerous areas of the pitch, the zones of high probability. Every run he makes, every movement, and every finish is designed to maximize his chances of success, leaving no room for the chaos that football usually thrives on. This brings us to the next chapter of our story, the shift in his environment. When he arrived in the Premier League, the skepticism was palpable. People asked if he could perform against the most intense, tactically sophisticated defenses in the world. What happened next wasn't just a successful transition, it was a total tactical capitulation from the rest of the league. We are about to look at how he turned the toughest league in the world into his personal playground. Are you ready to see how the numbers transformed from promising to historically impossible? The path to his current status as a defensive nightmare is just getting more intense, and the next block explores exactly how he broke the English game. Stay with us, because we're only just beginning to uncover the blueprint of his dominance. When Erling Haaland arrived at Manchester City, the murmurs of doubt were deafening. We've heard it 1,000 times. Can he adapt to the pace of the Premier League? Or is he just a product of a specific system? The skepticism was not born of malice, but of experience. The Premier League is a graveyard for strikers who rely on physicality alone, a league where defenders are coached to perfection and the physicality is relentless. But Haaland didn't just adapt, he initiated a hostile takeover of the league's defensive metrics from day one. And this is the moment the tactical landscape changed forever. For decades, the Premier League's most successful teams were built on the idea of the false nine, a striker who drops deep, confuses the defensive line, and creates space for wingers. The goal was to manipulate the defender's positioning until they were pulled out of their comfort zone. But Haaland, he made that entire paradigm look like a relic of the past. He didn't want the space the system provided. He created his own by purely technical, physical, and psychological force. In the first few months, you could see the exact moment the realization hit the opposition. They were setting up their defensive shape for a striker who was supposed to play a specific way, and then Haaland would simply ignore the plan. He started finding pockets of space between the center back and the full back that, until then, had been considered safe zones. And once he was there, he was lethal. The speed at which he could transition from a standing position to a full-blown sprint was faster than any defensive trigger we had seen in years. Defenders began to play deeper, sitting closer to their own goalkeeper, hoping to compress the space, but this only gave him more room to dominate the aerial battles, which, as any defender will tell you, is a nightmare all on its own. The panic wasn't just physical, it was structural. Managers who prided themselves on clean sheets and high-line defenses found that the moment they committed a single mistake, Haaland would be there, punishing them with the clinical indifference of a machine. The fear that modern defenders feel today is not the fear of being beaten by a clever bit of skill. It is the fear of being made to look slow, clumsy, and tactically unaware by a striker who is arguably the most efficient processor of space in the history of the game. He turned the most competitive league in the world into a personal highlight reel, breaking goal-scoring records that had stood for generations, and he did it with a nonchalance that was somehow more insulting than any display of ego. But here is the secret that the pundits often miss. The system wasn't just built around him. The system was forced to become him. Every touch of the ball from the midfield became a test. Every long pass felt like a death sentence for the defensive line. And for the defender tasked with marking him, the match became an exercise in extreme psychological endurance. You could play 89 minutes of perfect, flawless defense, but that one lapse, that one misplaced step, would result in the ball hitting the back of the net. That isn't just a striker scoring. That is a striker imposing his will on the entire match. We are seeing a shift where the defensive duties of a center back are no longer about marking a player, but about managing a crisis for the entire 90 minutes. Yet, as we look deeper into his stats and his movement, a pattern emerges that is even more concerning for his rivals. He is not just utilizing his raw power, he is using a level of spatial intelligence that most strikers only develop in their 30s. But where does this intelligence come from? And why are his movements so impossible to predict, even when the entire world knows exactly what he wants to do? The next block takes us into the biomechanics of his ghosting technique, the way he vanishes from a defender's vision and reappears exactly where they can't recover. We are moving from the tactical shift of the league to the individual secrets of his movement. The nightmare for the defenders is only deepening, and the numbers are about to get even more uncomfortable. Are you ready to see how he uses blindside physics to keep the best center backs in the world guessing? The archive is just opening, and the next revelations will explain why. Even when you know he's coming, there is simply no way to stop the inevitable. To understand the specific terror of facing Erling Haaland, you have to stop looking at what he does with the ball and start looking at what he does when he's completely ignored. This is what tactical analysts call the ghosting technique. It is a masterclass in psychological warfare. A center back's entire existence is built on monitoring the threat, keeping the striker in their peripheral vision, and maintaining a solid line of communication with their defensive partner. But Haaland plays against that instinct. He specializes in the blindside run, a movement so simple in theory, yet so devastating in practice that it has rendered high defensive lines obsolete across Europe. He waits for the exact moment the defender turns their head toward the ball, checking the flight of a pass or the position of a teammate, and in that split second, the moment of vulnerability, he vanishes. He doesn't run toward the ball, he runs into the vacuum. By the time the defender turns back, the ghost has materialized 5 yards deeper, already anticipating the trajectory of the pass. It isn't just about speed, though his acceleration is elite, it is about cognitive speed. He is processing the defensive shape faster than the players who are actually part of it. He knows that defenders are trained to hold their line, and he exploits the friction between that discipline and the natural human urge to track the ball. It's a game of cat and mouse, where the cat doesn't even know it's being hunted. This technique forces defenders into a permanent state of paranoia. You cannot stand still, because he will move behind you. You cannot follow him, because he will drag you out of position to create a hole for his teammates. You are trapped in a tactical checkmate before the pass is even made. But this ghosting isn't just a byproduct of talent, it is a learned behavior that he has refined since his early years. He treats the pitch like a chessboard, and he is the only one who knows the final move. When you hear defenders talk about playing against him, they rarely complain about his strength, though that is formidable. They complain about the exhaustion of it. The mental drain of never being able to switch off for a single second is what wears you down. And that is where the true terror lies. In the realization that you are not playing against a striker who wants to touch the ball 50 times a game. You're playing against a hunter who is content to disappear for 80 minutes, only to strike with lethal efficiency the one time you fall asleep. He has redefined the poacher role, elevating it from a simple tap-in artist to a master of psychological manipulation. However, the question remains, if his movement is so predictable in its lethality, why can't the best tactical systems in the world solve the puzzle? The answer leads us back to his connection with the midfield, a synergy that is so finely tuned it feels telepathic. But as we continue to pull back the curtain on this cyborg-like dominance, we have to acknowledge the next step in his evolution. We are moving from the physics of his movement to the way he has completely rewritten the financial and tactical value of a number 9 in the modern game. If he is the ghost on the pitch, he is the anchor of the most dominant financial project in football. Stay with us as we explore how the Haaland effect forced the entire transfer market to pivot and why clubs are now throwing out their old scouting manuals to find the next version of an impossible player. The archives are deep, and we are only just reaching the midpoint of this tactical breakdown. The next block will reveal the statistical anomaly that turned him into the most valuable asset in the sport. Are you ready to see why the market stopped caring about traditional value and started obsessing over pure, unadulterated output? When we talk about the fear Haaland inspires, it isn't just a physical or psychological reaction. It is a profound shift in the economics of the entire sport. Before his meteoric rise, the market for traditional strikers, the big, physical, archetypal number 9s, was shrinking. Coaches were obsessing over total football, where every player had to be a playmaker, a presser, and a passer. The big man up front was becoming a luxury, often deemed too static for the modern, high-intensity pressing games that define clubs like Manchester City, Liverpool, and Bayern Munich. Then, Haaland happened, and he didn't just break the mold, he shattered it into pieces that no club could afford to ignore. His success forced a tactical retreat from the false 9 obsession. He proved that you didn't need to sacrifice the traditional striker if that striker could move with the pace of a winger and press with the intensity of a defensive midfielder. This created an earthquake in the transfer market as every elite club suddenly scrambled to find their own version of a cyborg. You look at the massive investments made by clubs across Europe, desperate attempts to sign players like Victor Gyökeres, Benjamin Sesko, or even the lingering, complex saga of Victor Osimhen, and you see the direct fallout of the Haaland effect. These clubs are no longer looking for players who fit the system. They are looking for players who create the system. The financial data behind this is staggering. When we look at the spreadsheets of elite clubs today, the cost of a guaranteed 30-goal, a seasoned striker has skyrocketed. Clubs are willing to bypass algorithms, ignore resale value concerns, and break wage structures, all because they've seen what happens when you don't have a lethal focal point. Look at the Chelsea saga, or the confusion at Manchester United in recent years. When you lack that specific, brutal quality that Haaland provides, your entire project feels incomplete. Haaland made the number 9 position the most expensive piece of real estate in football once again, shifting billions of euros in market valuation in just a few short seasons. But this tactical and economic shift brought about a new, even more specific terror for defenders. They aren't just fighting one man, they are fighting an entire tactical setup designed to maximize his efficiency to the detriment of their defensive shape. The clubs that have adapted have moved away from the complex, build-up heavy football that characterized the late 2010s. Now they are embracing a direct, high-speed verticality. They are learning that sometimes the best pass isn't the one that breaks lines, it's the one that simply launches the ball into the space Haaland is about to own. This leads us to a critical realization about the Haaland terror. It is not just that he is good, it is that he is the focal point of a modern machine that has turned the pitch into a series of transition battles. Defenders, who are used to having time on the ball to organize, now find themselves in a permanent state of transition defense, a phase of the game that is historically the most prone to error. Every goal kick, every interception, every loose ball in midfield, it all feels like a ticking time bomb. This isn't just about the striker. It's about the fact that he forces your team to play a style of football that leaves you constantly exposed. As we pull back the curtain even further, we have to look at the psychological wear and tear on those who are tasked with stopping him. We've covered the tactical impact, but what about the man-to-man duels? Why does he seem to thrive in physical confrontations that would break lesser players? We are moving from the macro-tactical shift of the market to the micro-level of the physical duel. The fifth fact on our list explores why his physical presence isn't just about height or weight, but about the specific way he uses his center of gravity to pin defenders into submission. Are you ready to understand the pinning technique that leaves center backs helpless? The next block is where the physical battle turns into a brutal display of superiority. Stay with us, because the way he wins those 50-50 duels is the final piece of the puzzle regarding why he is, without question, the most terrifying player in the world right now. If you ask any world-class center back what it's actually like to stand shoulder to shoulder with Erling Haaland, they won't talk about his speed. They'll talk about his mass, his center of gravity, and the terrifying feeling of being pinned. This is the fifth secret of his dominance, and it is perhaps the most physically taxing aspect of his game, the pinning technique. When the ball is played toward him, Haaland doesn't just wait for it to arrive, he actively seeks contact. He uses his massive frame to lean into the defender, not with the intention of pushing them over, which would risk a foul, but with the intention of taking away their ability to move their feet. He locks his center of gravity into theirs, effectively turning the defender into a stationary object. Once he has you pinned, you are effectively removed from the defensive equation. You are no longer defending the goal. You're simply trying to survive the physical weight he is pressing into your shoulder. By controlling your body position, he creates a private corridor of space between himself and the incoming ball. It's a subtle move, a masterclass in biomechanics that allows him to win aerial duels against defenders who should theoretically be more dominant in the air. He doesn't always need to jump higher than you. He just needs to ensure that you cannot get your feet set to jump at all. This is why you see so many defenders looking frustrated after an aerial challenge against him. It's not because they were out-jumped, it's because they were outmaneuvered before the ball had even reached its apex. This pinning isn't just a physical attribute, it's a calculated, rhythmic part of his play. He knows exactly which defenders have a lower center of gravity and which ones rely on agility, and he adjusts his lean accordingly. It is a terrifying exercise in pressure management. For the defender, the panic sets in when they realize that if they lean back to resist him, he will spin. If they lean in, he will roll them. He turns every single touch into a binary choice, and because of his sheer physical strength, both choices usually lead to the same outcome. The ball is under his control, and you are trailing by a yard. This level of physical dominance has had a ripple effect on the way defensive lines are structured. Teams are now forced to assign their strongest, most aggressive center back to shadow him specifically, often leaving the rest of their defensive structure compromised. It's a Haaland tax. You have to commit resources to him that you would normally spread across the rest of the City attack. And even then, there is no guarantee of success. The mental toll of these duels is immense. Defenders know that they are operating on a razor's edge. If they commit too hard, they risk a yellow card. If they don't commit enough, he turns them and fires a shot at the goal. But there is a secondary secret here, the way he uses his eyes and his body language to fake the direction of his pin. He is constantly scanning the defender, watching their shoulders, watching their weight distribution. He is a predator who understands the mechanics of his prey. And as we continue to dissect this biomechanical nightmare, the question moves beyond the physical. How does he maintain this level of intensity and precision, not just for a season, but for every single game he plays? We are reaching the point in our analysis where we have to talk about his mindset, the psychological threshold he crosses the moment he steps onto the pitch. We have covered the tactical siege, the phantom runs, and the physical pinning, but the fourth fact on our list delves into something even more intangible, the hunger that observers and teammates constantly mention. What is it about his internal drive that makes him play as if every game is his last? Are you ready to see how the most talented player in the world maintains the mentality of an underdog? The archive of his psyche is opening, and the next revelations will explain why his hunger is arguably his most dangerous weapon of all. You cannot look at Erling Haaland's goal-scoring record and see only the results of training drills. There is a psychological component to his game that remains the most elusive secret for those who try to replicate him. Opposing players, managers, and even his own teammates have all remarked on a specific, almost unsettling quality in his demeanor. A singular, relentless, and all-consuming hunger that manifests the moment he crosses the white line. It isn't just a desire to win. It is a fundamental refusal to accept anything less than total dominance. In a modern football landscape where brands, social media, and sponsorships often dictate the narrative, Haaland seems to exist in a vacuum, entirely driven by the primitive urge to put the ball in the net. This isn't just professionalism, it's an obsession that defies the fatigue and distraction that plague most elite athletes in their early 20s. When you look at the clips of his reactions after scoring a goal, you rarely see the jubilant, carefree celebration of a man enjoying the spotlight. Often, you see a man who's already calculating where the next opportunity will come from. He treats every goal as a temporary relief rather than a definitive victory. This is a terrifying trait for a defender to encounter. You are not facing a player who is satisfied with a hat trick. You are facing a player who feels that if he has scored 3, he has failed by not scoring 4. This creates an environment on the pitch where the defender feels they are never, ever safe. Even when the game is won, even when the scoreline is comfortable, his intensity doesn't dip. He hounds the opposing back line, he pressures the goalkeeper for a pass that should be routine, and he makes runs that force you to remain at 100% focus until the referee blows the final whistle. This psychological pressure is a form of defensive tax. Because you are constantly forced to monitor his movement and his body language, you lose the mental capacity to properly support your teammates in other areas of the pitch. He draws you in. He keeps you engaged in a personal, high-stakes duel, and he does it without ever appearing to grow tired. The hunger that observers discuss is essentially his ability to treat every transition, every turnover, and every set piece as a personal affront if he isn't the one getting the shot off. It is an ego-driven engine that is perfectly calibrated for the demands of a high-performance striker. He has cultivated a mental state where the expectation of success is not just a goal, it is a standard of existence. But where does this drive originate, and how does it manifest in the specific, tactical ways he interacts with his teammates? We have analyzed the physics, the tactics, and the mental weight he brings to the field, but there's a collaborative aspect to his game that is equally terrifying. He has learned to use the intelligence of those around him, the vision of Kevin De Bruyne, the tactical rigidness of Pep Guardiola, as an extension of his own predatory nature. We are moving from the solitary mind of the hunter to the way he orchestrates the most feared attack in world football. The third fact on our list explores the synergy of terror, why City's midfield knows exactly when to play the ball before he even commits to the run. We are peeling back the layers of his partnership with the world's best playmakers and why, despite all the tactical analysis in the world, the final pass remains the one thing defenses cannot block. The next block will dissect why the timing of his connection with his teammates is the final, unbreakable link in the chain of his dominance. The archive is nearly complete, and we are about to see why the Haaland system is essentially a foolproof machine for destruction. Are you ready to see how he turns simple passes into guaranteed goals? The final secrets of his tactical supremacy are just ahead. If you watch a Manchester City match against a low-block defensive system, you are watching a game of patience, a game where the defenders are essentially waiting for the moment their concentration will inevitably fail. And for Erling Haaland, this isn't just about his own skill. It is about the synergy of terror that he shares with the playmakers around him. The third secret of his dominance is how he has synchronized his internal clock with the vision of players like Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden. In modern football, the killer pass is becoming a lost art, often sacrificed for the safety of possession. But at City, that pass has been weaponized. Haaland doesn't just make runs, he makes predictable runs into unpredictable spaces, and his midfielders have reached a level of understanding where they don't even need to look up to know exactly where he will materialize. For a defender, this is the deepest level of despair. You can track Haaland perfectly for 85 minutes, you can hold your line, you can communicate, you can double-team him, and then, in one moment of absolute brilliance from a midfielder, the entire structural integrity of your team is undone. The defenders aren't just terrified of Haaland, they are terrified of the space he occupies between the lines. It is a dual threat. If you step up to pressure the midfielder, the ball goes over your head into Haaland's path. If you drop back to protect the space, the midfielder has time to pick a pass or shoot from distance. Haaland acts as the ultimate forcing function, compelling defenses to choose their own destruction. He has turned simple passes into guaranteed goals because he understands the geometry of the pitch better than almost any striker in the history of the Premier League. This synergy is built on the fact that he doesn't clutter the space. He is remarkably disciplined in his movement, often standing perfectly still until the exact nanosecond the tension in the midfield reaches its breaking point. Then he moves. It's like watching a predator that remains perfectly camouflaged until the trap is sprung. For the defender, this creates a state of perpetual anxiety. You know the pass is coming. The entire stadium knows it's coming, but the timing of his arrival at the end of that pass is so precise that there is no physical way to intercept it without committing a foul. He has essentially automated the goal-scoring process through a combination of elite positioning and the highest level of service in world football. The statistics back this up. When you look at the heat maps of his goal contributions, they are almost exclusively confined to the danger zones of the penalty area. He isn't wasting energy chasing the ball in the middle of the pitch. He is investing his energy in the final 10 yards, where matches are won and lost. Defenders have tried to mitigate this by playing zonal marking, hoping to pass him off to a teammate, but he has a habit of finding the seams between two defenders, the exact point where communication is most likely to fail. He exploits the human element of the defense, that moment of hesitation where you think, is he your man or my man? By the time that question is answered, the ball is already in the back of the net. But as we peel back the layers of this systematic dominance, we have to look toward the end of this journey. We have explored the tactical terror, the market shift, the physics of his movement, and the psychological weight he brings to the field. But there is a final, darker secret regarding his longevity. We've seen the rise, but how does a player with this much physical demand on his frame keep going? And what does the future of defending look like against an opponent who seems to be evolving faster than they can learn? The next block takes us into the high-tech, data-driven world of his recovery and the rigorous physical maintenance that keeps his machine-like frame functioning at peak efficiency. We are moving from the pitch to the lab, exploring the final frontier of his endurance. Are you ready to see how he survives the schedule that kills other players? The archive is narrowing down to the final few secrets of the most lethal player on the planet. To To understand why defenders are so terrified, you have to realize that the Haaland you see in the 89th minute is, statistically, often faster and more dangerous than the Haaland you saw in the first minute. This is the fourth secret of his dominance, his relationship with the biology of endurance. While most strikers at the elite level begin to show the softening of fatigue as matches reach their closing stages, a drop in intensity, a slightly slower reaction time, a heavier touch, Haaland seems to enter a second wind that defies the physiological limits of most professional athletes. He doesn't just manage his energy, he has optimized his entire life to ensure that his peak performance window is as wide as possible. This isn't just about his training sessions at the Etihad campus, it's about a lifestyle of discipline that has become legendary in the industry. We're talking about a rigorous, data-driven approach to sleep, circadian rhythm management, and a diet that mirrors the fuel requirements of a high-performance engine. When defenders face him late in a game, they aren't just playing against a striker, they are playing against a man who has invested more into his recovery than almost any of his peers. They see the same terrifying, explosive movement, the same relentless pursuit of the space behind them, and the same clinical calmness in front of a goal, even when their own legs are burning with exhaustion. The tactical implication of this is massive. Because Haaland doesn't fatigue like a normal player, his team doesn't have to change their strategy to accommodate his decline. They can play the exact same way in the 90th minute as they do in the first, forcing defenders to remain in a state of absolute, unbreakable concentration for the duration of the entire match. One momentary lapse in focus, one tired muscle, or one dropped shoulder is all he needs to seal the game. It is a psychological burden that forces teams to play perfect defense, a standard that is humanly impossible to maintain over 90 minutes against a player who treats the final whistle as just another opportunity. This, of course, creates a vicious cycle. Defenders become more fearful, their teams pull back deeper, they adopt more conservative shapes to compensate for his endurance, and in doing so, they concede more space in the middle, allowing the City midfield to feed him even more easily. He has successfully manipulated the tactical environment of the league by simply being the fittest person on the pitch. But there is more to this than just training. There is a specific, inhuman aspect to the way he processes the game, a cognitive speed that remains unclouded by the fatigue that forces everyone else to think in slower, more reactive terms. As we look deeper into the Haaland terror, we are led to the next step of our investigation, how he uses this endurance to break down the most resilient defensive structures on the planet. We have talked about the physical and the biological, but the next secret lies in the tactical way he uses that energy, the constant, relentless pressure on the defensive line that forces mistakes even from the best defenders in the world. Why does he never stop running, even when the ball is nowhere near him? The next block peels back the layers of his off-the-ball movement, showing why he is arguably the most intelligent nuisance in the history of the sport. We are deep into the archives now, and the truth about why he is an unsolvable problem is becoming clearer. Are you ready to see how his off-the-ball movement is actually a psychological trap? The next revelations are essential to understanding the complete picture of his dominance. If you have watched Erling Haaland long enough, you start to notice a pattern that is more frightening than his speed or his physical stature. His finishes don't look like human effort, they look like programmed responses. This is the second secret of his dominance, what we call the art of the unstoppable finish. In the modern game, strikers are often taught to be composed, to place the ball, to use finesse. But Haaland has effectively rewritten the mechanics of finishing by treating the goal not as a target to be aimed at, but as a space that must be occupied by the ball as quickly as possible. His shooting technique is not about elegance, it is about minimal time from contact to the net. He doesn't need to look at the keeper because he has already internalized the geometry of the goal. He knows exactly where the frame is in relation to his own body at all times. For a goalkeeper, this is a nightmare scenario. Most strikers give you a tell, a shift in their hips, a glance at the corners, a brief moment of hesitation as they decide where to aim. Haaland removes that window of opportunity. He strikes the ball early, often before the defender can even commit to a block, and before the keeper can set their feet. By the time the keeper registers that he has struck the ball, he's already whistling past them. He has mastered the art of shooting through the defender, using the opposition player as a screen to obscure the keeper's vision. It is a tactical layer that is rarely discussed, but is one of the primary reasons he scores such high volumes of goals from angles that should be impossible. He isn't just shooting, he is playing a game of visual chess with the goalie. This efficiency is the primary reason why his conversion rate remains an anomaly. He is not the player who needs 5 chances to score one. He is the player who converts the half chance that shouldn't even be a chance in the first place. You can hold him to 1 shot in a game, and he will score. You can minimize his touches, and he will still find the one moment where the ball drops to his feet. There is inevitability to his play that creates an atmosphere of anxiety in the stadium. As a defender, you spend the entire match living in the shadow of that inevitability. You know that he doesn't need a perfect game to beat you. He only needs 1 perfect millisecond. This leads us to the final, existential question of his career. We have looked at the physics, the psyche, the market value, and the tactical siege. But now we must look at the future. How long can a player sustain this level of output before the league, the defenses, and the sheer biological reality of the sport catch up to him? Are we witnessing the peak of a short, burning star, or the beginning of a decade-long reign of terror that will force football to change its defensive structures forever? The final fact on our list, the first secret, explores the Haaland paradox, why the more we understand him, the harder he becomes to stop. We are at the finish line of our archive. Are you ready for the final revelation that defines why Erling Haaland is not just a player, but a paradigm shift in human performance? The archive is closing, but the legend is still being written, and the final block will put everything we've discussed into a single, breathtaking perspective. We have dissected the physics, the spatial intelligence, the psychological hunger, and the tactical synergy that define Erling Haaland, but we arrive at the most baffling secret of all, the Haaland paradox. In any other era of football, a player this singular, this physically dominant, and this predictable in his end goal would eventually be solved. Defenders, analysts, and coaches have access to more data than at any point in human history. They have watched thousands of hours of his movement. They have mapped every run he makes into the box. They have calculated the exact angles he prefers for his finishes. Yet, despite being the most analyzed, most studied, and most watched athlete on the planet, his production does not wane. He does not plateau. He evolves. The paradox is this. The more information defenses have about him, the more he seems to weaponize their anticipation against them. When a defender knows he's going to make a run behind, he'll instead hold his position, dragging the center back out and creating a lane for his teammates. When a team decides to pack the box and deny him a cross, he drifts to the edge and prepares to fire a long-range bullet. He has entered a level of game state management where he is constantly pivoting to negate the defensive adjustments made to stop him. It's as if he's playing a video game on a difficulty setting that the rest of the league hasn't even unlocked yet. He isn't just a striker anymore. He is a reactive tactical system that thrives on the defense's attempt to neutralize him. Every tactical tweak meant to silence him ends up creating a different, equally lethal opportunity. This leads us to the question that haunts every defensive coach in the Premier League. How do you stop a player who treats your defensive adjustments as a menu of options? There is no perfect way to defend Haaland, because the moment you commit to one defensive strategy, you leave yourself exposed to the other 5 things he is equally capable of doing. This creates a state of permanent hesitation, and in the world of elite sports, hesitation is fatal. Defenders are terrified not because they don't know what he is going to do, but because they are paralyzed by the number of ways he can punish them for trying to stop it. He has essentially turned the known threat into an unstoppable threat by simply being better at the basics than anyone else has been in decades. And then there is the biological reality. We have discussed his recovery and his machine-like dedication to his body, but we have to address the long-term horizon. If he stays healthy, if he continues to refine his decision-making with the same clinical, cold-blooded efficiency he has shown since he was a teenager, we are not just looking at a great striker. We are looking at a record breaker who might render the history of the sport unrecognizable by the time he hangs up his boots. The records for goals in a season, goals in a career, and goals in the Champions League are all effectively under siege. He is moving toward a status where his own shadow is his only real competitor. We have peeled back the layers of a striker who has become the most feared entity in modern football. We have seen how he manipulates the geometry of the penalty area, how he exploits the psychological blind spots of the world's most disciplined center backs, and how his physical conditioning has turned a high-stakes sport into a game of attrition where the defender always loses. But if there is one final overarching truth to this story, it is that Erling Haaland is not just a statistical phenomenon, he is a marker of an era. The defenders of today are not just terrified because he scores goals, they are terrified because he represents an evolution that they were never trained to counter. He is the first of a new breed of total striker, one that combines the raw, primal athleticism of the past with the data-driven, hyper-efficient spatial awareness of the future. When we look back at the history of the beautiful game, we categorize players by the problems they posed. There was the movement of Ronaldo, the dribbling of Messi, the positioning of Inzaghi, and the power of Shearer. Haaland has effectively synthesized these archetypes into one cohesive, terrifying package. He is a predator who doesn't just score, he creates a gravity on the pitch that pulls defensive structures apart simply by existing in them. This brings us to the final answer of our investigation. Modern defenders are terrified of Erling Haaland because he has stripped away the illusion of control. Before him, even against the world's best, a defender could argue that a well-executed plan might keep the scoreline clean. With Haaland, the plan is irrelevant. The execution is what fails. He has made the art of defending feel like a temporary stay of execution. As he continues to rewrite the record books, we find ourselves asking, where does the story go from here? The Haaland paradox suggests that even as he becomes more familiar, he becomes more efficient, and that is a terrifying prospect for the next generation of center-backs. He is not slowing down, he is recalibrating. And for the clubs who are currently scrambling to build their own cyborgs to compete with the Manchester City machine, they are learning the hardest lesson of all. You cannot replicate a hunger like his. You cannot by the spatial IQ he possesses. You can only hope to contain the storm for as long as your legs, your lungs, and your concentration allow. This has been the story of a striker who forced football to evolve. We've seen the rise from the freezing pitches of Norway, the tactical siege of the Premier League, and the cold, mechanical process of his finishing. It's a career that is still in its infancy, yet he has already changed the fundamental values of the transfer market and the tactical architecture of every team that faces him. This is the beauty of the sport, the constant, relentless drive toward perfection. Erling Haaland is a glimpse into what the future of human performance looks like, and the fear he causes is the greatest compliment a striker can ever receive. We have reached the end of our deep dive into the blueprint of a modern icon. If this series has changed how you watch your favorite team's defense, or how you analyze the movement of the strikers you watch every weekend, then our mission here at the Football Archive is accomplished. The stories of football are never truly over. They are just waiting to be told. If you enjoyed the series, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss our next investigation into the legends and myths of the beautiful game. Remember, there's always more to the story than the highlights show. Thank you for walking through the archives with us. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.